why don't we go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming out, everyone. It's going to be a really great session, actually. We've been forward to this event for some time now. I'm Chris Brown. I am a professor in the Department of History. I'm actually a British historian as opposed to a French historian, but I hope you'll forgive me for being an interloper this evening. We're going to hear about two spectacular works, new books, that are contributions to the history of Atlantic capitalism, to colonial slavery, and to the history of the family. I'm going to keep my introduction brief so we have as much time as possible for the presentation and for the discussion. We'll hear first from Paul Cheney, who is professor of history at the University of Chicago. He will present his new book, Cul-de-sac, Patrimony, Capitalism and Slavery in French Saint-Domingue, which is just out now from the University of Chicago Press. The book represents, among other things, a continuation of his long-standing interest in the history of early modern capitalism. Some of you will know his first book, Revolutionary Commerce. We'll then hear from Pierre Forst, professor of French and history here at Columbia, who will introduce his new book from Johns Hopkins University Press, Wealth and Disaster, Atlantic Migrations from a Pyrenean Town in the 18th and 19th century. A work which is, in addition to being a really fascinating study of a particular family and plantation, works across several generations. And one of the interesting things about it is the way the generational story gets told. So these two books go very, very well together, so I think it'll be a very fruitful conversation. And our commentators who will present brief comments on the works will have Carl Wennerland, who's Associate Professor of History here at Barton College, the author of many distinguished works in economic history, Casualties of Credit, Mercantilism Reconsidered with Philip Stern. And then we'll hear from Emmanuel Sada, who's Associate Professor of French and, as all of you know, Director of the Center for French and Francophone Studies. And so they will comment briefly on the two books. I think they actually go, one will comment on one and one will comment on the other. I think is that how we worked it out? And then we'll have a general conversation. So, Paul, would you like to start us off?
Can everyone hear me? I have a way of swallowing my words, so if you can't hear me, please interrupt. First, I just want to thank Gary for organizing this Shannon somewhere, for helping with everything. I really appreciate it. It's very nice to be back at Columbia University where I did my graduate work, and in the audience are many people that I've studied with in various stages of my intellectual formation, so I'm glad to see you here. I want to begin by speaking, maybe giving a threefold sense to the title of my book, Cul-de-sac. And then to maybe end by talking a little, well, I'll leave it at that, then I'll leave it to Carl. First, just so you get a sense, Cul-de-sac is a place in Saint-Domingue, which is present-day Haiti. If you look at Port-au-Prince, it's a sugar growing plain right outside of Port-au-Prince that was among the most fertile and productive sugar growing plains in all of Saint-Domingue, and therefore in the whole of what is sometimes termed the Antillean plantation complex in the 18th century. So by the end of the 18th century, Saint-Domingue alone, the island of Saint-Domingue, produced 1/3 of all sugar consumed in Europe and in North America. The island alone produced more than about as much as all of the British Antillean islands. At the end of the 18th century, it produced about half the coffee consumed. So it was the very center of this machine cranking out all these tropical commodities that Europeans were eating, were consuming at the time. And if one wants to kind of get a sense of what this Antillean plantation complex looked like, or its development, I mean, I'm sort of taking the cul-de-sac plain as the apogee of the development of that system. The Antillean islands were settled in a sort of kind of leapfrog-like fashion. Europeans would come, settle them, and then when usually when islands reached a certain level of maturity, they would, not that the plantations would disappear from those places, but there would be new installations and new parts of the Antilles to take advantage of new territory, basically new virgin territory, better conditions for the expansion of mercantile capital. And so at the very end of the 18th century, I mean, there's this geographical expansion of the Antillean plantation complex, fueled mainly by slave labor. The cul-de-sac plain is the most highly developed thing that the French really have to offer. As everyone sitting here probably knows, this system, the French part of the system, mainly shuts down after the French Revolution, and the plantation production moved on to other places, to Cuba, to the North American continent, and to other places. But I'm in this book taking the cul-de-sac plain, as it were, kind of to symbolize or to kind of concretize many of these economic trends throughout the 18th century. And I do this by writing a microhistory of one plantation on the cul-de-sac plain owned by a family called the Ferrand de la Ferrandais. And I'll get back to them just a little bit when I continue my comments. And the way I do this is by looking at another series of cul-de-sac, in the plural as it were, of different strengths and weaknesses of this plantation complex in the production of sugar, marketed, to be sent back to Europe. The first is by looking at these plantations, which were really kind of household. I mean, they're designed to be self-contained households, and yet turned always toward the market, the production toward the market. But this was a solution that didn't always necessarily work very well, notably for the slaves. A second, and these are a number of kind of, let's say, impasses in the expression of 18th century capitalism. This inability to really find a kind of solid institutional foundation for plantation production of sugar and coffee. That's more Pierre's ballad today. Another sort of area that I look at in great detail in this book is just the very problem of the governance of slaves, disciplining of slaves during over this period. I'm sorry, I just got here. There are many kind of contradictions at the heart of the treatment of slaves during the 18th century on the plantations of Saint-Domingue and elsewhere in the Antilles. Notably, the inability to kind of reconcile this new sense that this sense that in fact an adequate, humane treatment of slaves could somehow comport with the production of profit on the plantation. So that's another sort of impasse that I look at in this book. A third kind of site of impasse that I look at is just the imperial dynamics. All these islands were constantly, and not constantly, but very often besieged by warfare, besieging one another. And war was really something endogenous to the system throughout the 18th century. So nothing that these imperial powers who set up these plantations could really get around. Even though they would like to, and it was always very, very disruptive for them. And fourth and finally, another kind of site that's very, very important for this book is just the very fact of elite collaboration and conflict on these islands. And I look at these three different families. The one family of aristocrats, the Ferrand de la Ferrandais, who I just mentioned. Another, the Pinot family, who are Creoles on the island of Saint-Domingue. These are people who moved to the island quite some time ago and are kind of making their way, but are being steadily kind of displaced by these new moneyed aristocrats coming in from France. And then there's a whole other kind of social layer here that I've examined of these middle-class people, oftentimes who made their way directly to Saint-Domingue. Pierre studies them probably in more detail than I do, but who often worked as the plantation managers on these sugar plantations, or coffee plantations. The relationships between these different social layers were oftentimes, well, first they're collaborative, but they're often highly contentious. And this is something I look at length in this book. I don't think I have too much more to say about that, except maybe I'll address a little bit Pierre's book, or maybe what is or is not in my book, or that maybe Pierre addresses a little bit more than I do. I mean, this is a study of a certain kind of family capitalism, a certain sort of collaboration that took place and reached its terminal point during the French Revolution, or maybe lasted a little while longer. But one thing I don't really look at, and I think that Pierre is maybe better situated to examine than I do, is that the people I'm looking at, these aristocrats, had, as it were, vertical family structures, right? They were interested in perpetuating their wealth, their family status vertically through their line. And on the other hand, they're confronting all these different kinds of people in Saint-Domingue, notably this Creole family who I look at, the Binot family, who have different sorts of family strategies, who have different sorts of histories that I think need to be or should be analyzed quite differently. Maybe we can discuss that later in our talk. And third and finally, I'll give a different sort of sense of this cul-de-sac explored in my title by talking about something that isn't there. I actually had a line in the introduction to my book where I talked about the 2008 financial crisis, saying, here's another instance where a system that is really weak, or apparently very weak, very fragile, and very crisis-prone, is hit with a crisis, and yet the managers of these systems don't feel that they have any way to go. Right? There are minor reforms, and these people are not stupid, right? I mean, they understand that they're dealing with a system that needs significant reform. They're not stupid, they can understand what's going on, but there's no real way forward to them. They need to keep kind of plowing ahead. And actually, my editor read this and he said, don't put that in because you don't know anything about the financial crisis. You don't know anything about this, and it's going to seem really dated and weak later on. So don't put that in. But I think actually that lack of insight, that inability to really see beyond a system that's not working, that can't actually be reformed in some sort of plausible shape, lies at the center of this book, of the people that I'm studying in this book. The absentee owners, the managers, the families on the ground, all these people understand that there's something seriously wrong with the system that they're presiding over, and yet the only thing they can do is present these sort of weakly palliative solutions. They know that they're running down this sort of dead end, if you'll forgive me repeating this phrase again, they're running down this dead end, but there's nothing that they can do about it, or they want to do about it. And I trace this story really through the 18th century. What's astonishing when you examine this story is how persistent this whole regime that I examined in this book is. Here are these people. They go through the revolution. There have been uprisings before. This economy is constantly cut off. They can't do anything about it, and yet they keep moving exactly in the same direction to the point where the new elites of Haiti, not the white elites of Haiti, but oftentimes the black elites of Haiti, try to take the exact same system and to make it work, to reinstantiate or to rehabilitate the plantation complex in situ. It doesn't really work. But it's a real testament to the sort of limitations of these people in their context. So
we're going from Carl now.
Okay. Thank you. Paul Cheney's book, Cul-de-sac, is based primarily on 380 letters between absentee plantation-owning family the Ferronais and the manager of the property, Jean-Baptiste Corbier, and his son. He found the first 220 of these letters in the French National Archives. He then, based on what he called an uncertain lead, approached the inheritors of the Ferronais papers to see if he might be able to search the documents to see if he could find additional letters. I remember meeting Paul in Paris during this moment a couple of years ago. He was rather secretive about what he was looking for and extremely anxious about whether he would actually obtain access to these archives. I recall him saying that it would determine whether this project became a short article or a great book. Obviously, things worked out rather well, and Paul has now written that great book. The letters received by the French nobleman invested in the plantation economy of Saint-Domingue from his bourgeois local manager, upon which this book is based, provides a remarkably rich historical source. These letters vividly provide information not just about the day-to-day activities of the plantations, but also reflects on global and geopolitical factors, as well as engages in a fair amount of introspection. We hear about all kinds of challenges, conflicts, problems, and struggles, but also about successes and visions of improvements. We obtain a glimpse into the relationship between Paris and Saint-Domingue, absentee landowners and managers, the nobility and the bourgeoisie, planters and slaves, men and women, parents and children.
When the cadastre was put in place, then it's more complicated. But after a few hours, I found that, well, initially I found that the house had been sold in 1899 by, it was owned by a shoemaker who lived in Montevideo, Uruguay. So that was interesting, but not entirely surprising, as I knew about Basque immigration to South America. But then when I went further back in time, I found that in 1818, the house was the property of a whole bunch of people. Some of whom were local. One lived in New Orleans, and others lived in various places in Cuba. And I said to myself, who the heck are these people? And at that point, my interest was triggered by the fact that it was a place that was familiar to me, and also some names on the page that were entirely unfamiliar. The family name was Lameranx. I had absolutely no idea who those people were. And that really triggered my interest and curiosity, and I made it my mission to find out who these people were. And I quickly hypothesized that since they were French, they might have been previously planters in Saint-Domingue, and it turned out to be the case. So I was able, little by little, to reconstruct that story. So there was one initial immigrant who left from that town a century before. Started a coffee plantation, acquired many slaves, became very rich, and then the family was kicked out by the Haitian Revolution, and they started over in Cuba and became rich again. But throughout that time, they kept traveling between America and Europe, so there was constant circulation across the Atlantic. So initially I knew very little, then the puzzle started to fill up. So at some point I found out that one of my characters had been an aide-de-camp to Toussaint Louverture during the Haitian Revolution. And that was a puzzling fact. How come a white plantation owner is actually a staff member of the black general who led the Haitian Revolution. So that puzzle was worth investigating. But I also knew that I had a story right there. And to me it was also fascinating, and that was sort of my personal discovery, that this house that used to be my grandparents' house this place in which I used to play ball as a child, was connected to a major figure in world history with 1 degree of separation. So it made the story meaningful to me. So I kept investigating that family, and then I discovered that several other families had produced immigrants to Saint-Domingue in the 18th century. It was not exactly a mass phenomenon, but it was quite significant and extensive. In particular, I identified another immigrant, so who made it into the story. So the initial immigrant, the first family, was Marc-Antoine Lanérinx. This other immigrant who left 20 years later was Jean Muscardi. And so he went to the exact same place in Saint-Domingue. So this phenomenon is known by social scientists as chain migration. So he was initially protected by the first immigrant, probably worked for him as a plantation manager, and then started his own plantation, bought slaves, and became very rich. The initial immigrant was noble, well, not the kinds of nobles that Paul was talking about. We are talking about a very low nobility. They are barely more prosperous than like a prosperous farmer. But my second immigrant was a peasant, so he became very rich in Saint-Domingue. He did not marry a white or the heiress of a white plantation. He had children with his household manager, who was a free woman of color. So he had mixed race descendants. And these descendants remained in Haiti after Haitian independence and became part of the Haitian elite. In particular, there was a General Muscardi who played a role in the 1830s. And one of the descendants of that family was, in fact, Demesvar Delorme, who is a major Haitian author, who in fact wrote down memories of his youth, in which he mentions a General Muscardi, who was the son of a white plantation owner named Muscardi, and I was able to connect the two, something that no one had been able to do before. So that was quite fine. So just a couple more remarks. The content. So my research was really document based. I did not set out to prove a bigger point initially. I started with a puzzle. I simply asked myself how two younger sons who were destined to be poor became rich. What motivated them to go to America? How exactly they got rich? How much they paid to cross the ocean? How they got the money? How much they paid for land and slaves? Who the slaves were? What interactions they had with them, including having children together? And what exactly happened to them after the slaves threw them out? My work was also collaborative, and it helped that I was familiar to the people from the town, so I had access to private archives, so in that sense my experience was very similar to Paul's, so the set of archival documents I worked with would have been much poorer if I had not had those sort of personal connections. And I also, for the Cuban and Saint-Domingue part of the story, I was lucky to find correspondence, people I really found via email and sort of genealogy bulletin boards, people who left messages, and I connected with them, and they found extremely interesting documents that really made it into the book and that were part of the story I'm telling. One thing about the theory, there's quite a bit of theory that goes into the book, in particular Bourdieu and Lefebvre, and what they wrote about house-based societies. And I had some indigenous knowledge of this myself because I used to go to that region when I was a child. They had indigenous knowledge themselves because they come from that region. So you have sort of an interesting connection here, which is sort of personal knowledge of those issues and a more theoretical take on the same. And I would say finally that in some ways the main character of the story is that house, the house with the tennis court, which led me to the initial discoveries, and that was owned by that family until 1818. So as a result, that was part of the initial intent. As a result of my research, the house was actually put on the register of historic places in 2011 by the French government.
Thank you. Manuel?
Thank you. So, thank you very much for including this conversation. This is not exactly the very familiar terrain, although I had the pleasure to read some of the work of Pierre before the book, and I even actually looked for some of the characters in the État civil of Bourbon in the summer of 2012, so I feel like I just spent like 1 hour or two, so it's not like that's swallowed by that today. So I would say just a few things, and trying to stay concise with some time for the conversation. So this is a book that tells the history of two families over 3 generations, both the low nobility family from the Pays Basque and the kind of rich peasants family, and their interactions in the vast chain of migrations across the Atlantic in the context of the primitive accumulation of capital through slave work. It makes, I would say, 2 major contributions from my perspective. One that I don't know very much about, so I won't spend too much time on that, but I think this is an essential contribution, and another one I know a little more about. So the first contribution is obviously the big book that Pierre said he didn't have in mind, but he ended up with, which is basically a contribution to the history of global capitalism in the 18th and 19th century, and that in itself is already some no small feat in some ways, because this history is often, or most often as far as I can tell, divided along, or severed along the dividing line between, on each side of the age of the revolution. So those 2 centuries are taken together. And what Pierre does in this book is to go against a very large body of economic thought and historiography that think about the relationship between trade and commerce as something that is peaceful. And so in terms of the recent historiography, it seems to me that Pierre is going through, is pushing back against a relatively ironic consensus in the field of Atlantic history, itself very much linked to the rise of globalization in the 1980s and 90s. And that has, made the point that trade is do commerce. Trade is produces understanding and to some extent peace. Pierre shows that it's not true by looking at very closely at what is happening in Saint-Domingue, and beyond that trade, global trade is predicated on a strong military, which itself is related to the protection of monopolies. So there are 2 correlates to this point, which I think is really essential. One is that colonial capitalism actually was not predicated on free trade, but on mercantilism. And obviously that on tensions, on agonism, and on what we call the jealousy of trade. That's seems to be a very important point that pushes against not only historiography, but the important point in the history of economic thought, Adam Smith, and the wealth of nation. The wealth of nation is not made against trade, but it's made on the military, and the protection of monopolies, and war, the possibilities of war. So that's one very important point that in his very humble presentation of the book, Pierre has neglected to mention that I think it's very important and extremely convincing. Correlatively, another correlative point to that is that the history of capitalism, of the global capitalism in the 18th and 19th century, is not a history of smooth growth, constant growth. It's a history of very high volatility and disasters and wars and disruptions. So effectively, there was a very high profitability in the colonies, but that was the other side of the medal was the its volatility. So a tango relationship between war, commerce, and slavery. That's one of the points, and of the correlations. But and obviously, this echoes profoundly the book of Paul. And also can raise some questions, I mean, at least for me, it was raising questions about the current situations. We don't like to do too easy rapprochement, but obviously, the jealousy of trade, the temptation of protectionism, and the different form of agonism and maybe war that it can produce are very much in our mind. So I think that's important. So that's, I think, the one big point, the big controversy, the big intervention that Pierre is looking. The other one is more methodological. Actually, in a way, there are three contributions, but for the sake of time, I'm going to bring them together. I think the book is a very important contribution to a methodological kind of sell point, or like a methodological project that has never been really I'm sorry, a project that has not bore fruit in a satisfying way. Maybe Paul actually is also doing that project. So there is some kind of interesting coincidence here in this publication of those two books at a very short amount of time. In a short amount of time. And by this I mean that both books, but I'm going to speak also about Pierre, are really trying to do what Francesca Triolato has called for, Mark Rothschild has tried to do, which is a history of the local and the global, a history that articulates micro-history and global history. And it seems to me that Pierre does that remarkably. As you remember from Mark Rothschild, she does that by looking at tragic and at individual biographies. And Pierre, in a way, Pierre's project is much more ambitious because you are looking at families, you are looking at entities that go beyond individual trajectories, but go in a much longer journey. And I think the heuristic value of this approach is great. So what Pierre's book does is to look at the trajectories of those two families across mostly three generations, even though you go into beyond, but mostly the bulk of the work bears on 3 generations. But those families are also groups. They are also villages. So there is the village of Damas that moves across the Atlantic, and also those families are. The first one was the Lamarine family, is the history of a maison, of a house. And Pierre, you say, and maybe that's, I think it's a little misleading for me when you present your work as the house, as the maison, the physical house, because it's a house of that obviously the anthropological model, the anthropological unit, much beyond the place. That includes the place, but that includes much more. It includes a social capital around the place, a set of lineages, a set of in a way, a historical identity that is fixed into a set of properties. And the properties can move, people sell and buy. The central house remains the defining character, but this is a nexus of people and things that are related to each other that goes much beyond a building, let's say. So, can I have a few more minutes?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the second contribution. The articulation of the local and the global in the history of migrations, of Atlantic migrations. So first of all, what Pierre does is to rehabilitate the Pyrenees. As you know, Pierre, in a former life, was a specialist of Pascal, and Pascal quipped about Montaigne. Montaigne said, truth on this side of the Pyrenees, error on the other, and Pascal said, a comic sort of justice that has a river for its boundary. And so what Pierre does is to take a Pascalian attitude here in the sense that there is no boundary for truth. There is no boundary for Pierre's digging through the archives. The archival work here is amazing, it's remarkable, and we spoke about a puzzle. This is a puzzle of 1 billion pieces. So there is some positivists, I think, like, our historians of today would call this positivist, but I would use that word in a good way. There is an incredible wealth of details that, recreation of the world that I found absolutely fascinating. And the rehabilitation of the Pyrenees has to do with the thinking about this anthropological model of the house that has been central to the reflection, the reflection and teaching of Lévi-Strauss, but also to the sociology of Pierre Bourdieu and also of Henri Lefebvre. Trying to show that it's, in a way, that's one of the very interesting points, it seems to me, that it's very local, it's very specific to the southwest region of France. So it's an exception in some ways, but at the same time it's a normal exception in the sense that it can shed light on a lot of different models of family organization that have shaped migration. So in the Poitou you can find this, in Normandy you can find this. So in a way it's a model of organization of domestic units, again across time, that tells something a little more general than just the local model. Okay. Second point about this, in the book there is a constant and fascinating variations of scale. So we go from the very micro context of Dondon in the 1730s and 1740s and then the 60s. I mean, super like coffee, the plants of coffee that month, and it's fascinating thing. And the larger kind of reflection on global trade. And so you have Adam Smith constantly mixed up, and that's another fascinating and kind of tour de force, the mixing of, the intervention of Adam Smith, for example, that's one of the authors that was quoted, of the time was quoted, with very local kind of, description of the profit that the coffee production can yield. Another element is, for me, very important, is the emphasis on families, not on individuals, but on families. Which leads to a lot of so what we have here is a history of a family. It's not a history of one person, but it's a history of family and the positions within the families, so the elders and the younger, and the collateral branches of the family, and so on and so forth. And in the introduction of the book, Pierre mentions Bourdieu, who says that the family is a central site for political sociology. Here, the family becomes a central site for political history. It seems to me there are fascinating developments about the Haitian Revolution. The description of the Haitian Revolution seen from a family, that is, from the relationship between father and sons across racial lines. So you understand this. This is not a political history of the Haitian Revolution, not a military history of the Haitian Revolution that we cannot know of, but a familial history. And that shades a completely different light, and that's that's completely fascinating. Last point about this, about the question of the local and global, is the fact that in the book, the central character becomes the house. Again, the house as a place, as a building, to which a jeu de paume is attached, but also the house in the sense of the house of the Lannorands, who becomes the house of the Marmont, the changelings. And that's something that is very interesting, because actually, attached to a house is a family, but the family is not a biological family. It's an invented family. It's a chosen family. You have lineage that are chosen one against the other. There is a very modern, in a way, dimension to this. This is a family that is not biological, and I find this fascinating. And that house becomes a real character. You're, in a way, the agent in this story, because a lot of what happens to individuals and to capital is shaped by the imperative to keep the house across history. And there, in that context, there are lots of very interesting, it seems to me, contributions about the notion of identity in history, because Pierre insists on not only in a way, the fact that people are attached a real identity in the sense of real estate, that people are made of their possessions, so that would be a Lockean vision of identity, that people are not just a set of psychological and social characteristics, but they are their properties. And that shows how that works across history in a very remarkable way. So those are the two main contributions. I'm going to have one thing, and then I'm going to maybe ask a question.
Well, I want to kind of get everybody back.
Okay, so just one thing. It's a great read. So it's very positivist and but at some point it could, no, but I was actually surprised how great it's actually, you could at some point Dumas, and there's, I mean, like, and so it's not Les Trois Mousquetaires, but they are, it's a fantastic read. I mean, like, it's a page turner. It's really, there is some pleasure at discovering the history of this family, and like you kept abreast by what's going to happen at the next generation, what happened to the younger brother, and there is some of that. And last thing was it was a form, it could be a question, but it's I don't know, it had to do with motivations, which is a central concept for you, and maybe some questions about how do you define motivations behind behavior, and behavior recorded in like notary, but that in a way it's very it's a question that has to do with the whole methodology. Since we don't have time, I won't really ask it, maybe we can discuss it. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so we have a large group here, not too much time. I do want to give the authors a chance just to say a few words, 45 seconds a minute in response to what you've heard, and then we'll open the conversation up.
Well, I think maybe we'll respond a little bit to what Emmanuel says. I think this is a real point of contact between my work and Pierre's. There's a whole sort of literature on the relationship between family and capitalism that basically says, listen, the family is a sort of counterpoint to all the sort of egotism and competition that you find in the market, and you find this everywhere. And I think that if you look at my book and you look at Pierre's book, you don't exactly find that. Let's just say,
they sue one another all the time.
I mean, it's and there's a whole kind of literature, particularly on the French Atlantic world, that sees the family as a sort of armature that kind of stabilizes these very volatile systems against the kind of the vacillations of the market. And instead, I think in both of our works, but in really different ways, you see a kind of rival family systems or rivalry within family systems. And I actually think most of the conflict in your story is actually happening in France. That's to say, how are the profits going to be realized, and who's going to keep control in France? And whereas in the story I tell, I think that there's a lot more conflict about, let's say, control within individual families. I think there's a conflict over rival family systems, right? You have this kind of aristocratic lineage system in Felon de la Chamonix, in contrast to what seems to be, and this is a sort of hole in my research, a kind of Creole sort of family, which is much more sort of horizontal and possibly egalitarian. And this is why the wife of Felon de la Chamonix, this incredible Creole woman, is married essentially into this marriage of interest, more or less rebels against this whole system and has illegitimate children and has them falsely baptized and eventually arrested and things like that. But I think that what you see are kind of conflicts within the system, not family coming to the rescue of that again.
And
Pierre?
yeah, just very briefly to sort of essentially repeat what Emmanuel said, but also to say that it's one point that Paul's book and my book share about the relationship between the relation between war and trade, and I think we both go against a certain view of Atlantic history that was popular in the 80s and 90s, sort of when there was great optimism about free trade and globalization, and so there was a tendency precisely to ignore mercantilism or I quote in the introduction, I quote Bernard Bailyn, who sort of downplays mercantile rivalries and so on. And I think what we both found out that actually by actually looking at the material is how central war was, and also how disruptive it was. That is, and that was a consequence of the very nature of mercantilism. Mercantilism is about a certain monopoly. So you make money by having a monopoly in a particular zone of the world, and you defend your monopoly militarily because your competitors are going to encroach on your territory. So you have to have powerful navies and armies in order to protect your monopoly. But in protecting your monopoly, of course, you have to go to war against your rivals. And when there is war, trade stops. So this is why, and I think both of our books show that war and trade were in this really tangled relationship. You need to make war in order to trade, but when you make war, you cannot trade anymore. And so this is why the systems we are describing were so incredibly unstable. One point about microhistory, and I think to give you an example, certainly in my book, and the way I understand studying a case. So a case is an exception to the rule. So the reason why the case is interesting is because it is an exception to the rule. And so the rule in the French Basque Country, also south of the Pyrenees, was that one child, the firstborn child, inherited the entire state. That was the rule, male or female, actually. So that could give you potentially an explanation for the reason why the younger son actually goes to America, because the younger son has nothing. But, and that's sort of the story how it's usually told. But in the successor generations in my story, in the second generation, it is actually the firstborn son who goes. And that makes it a case. That is, when the firstborn son goes, what does that mean? Is it an exception to the rule, or should the rule be reformulated differently? So that's how I understand microhistory.
That's great, thank you. So let's open up, there are questions, comments, observations. Yeah, Charlotte?
So two questions, both for Paul and Pierre, and because they want to engage them. First has to do with the role of the state as an actor, mediating actor. Is this on?
Yeah.
Very much. The state as a mediating actor in your respective narratives in the way that it mediates between the macro and the macro levels of your analysis. Carl's response was incredibly illuminating, especially as to the economic dynamics involved, but if you could talk about how the state participates in structuring markets and also, of course, mobilizing military might. And the second question is a little more inchoate and thinking aloud, but one thing that struck me about both of your books is this figure or figment of limitless, unbridled wealth, its possibility. And on one hand, it's a driver, it's a motivation of certain economic behaviors, but then it's always held in a certain degree of skepticism, right? It's either because there's a sense that the conspicuous display is forced and behind it is actual poverty, in some cases you said there's real poverty behind it. And so I was interested if you could just speak more abstractly even about how this fantasy of unbridled wealth motivated and structured economic behavior in Central America period.
Thank you, Charlie. Maybe I want to talk a little bit about just about the state, because I think that what's important here for instance, the French aristocracy, at least the aristocracy I'm talking about, is the role they play in colonization. And the French Empire as a whole, they're very, very important for the crown in establishing and maintaining control over these places. And so there's a sort of collaboration that goes on all through the 18th century, indeed earlier. They need these families, and in turn, these families obviously need the state. And one thing I think is quite important to sort of underline is that this is not unique to this colonial situation at all. This is a perfectly old regime dynamic. These elites in the state are collaborating, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And what I at least try to draw attention to in this book is that this collaboration is partly what accounts for the persistence of at least the aspiration to the persistence of this plantation economy well beyond the Haitian Revolution. Montesquieu had this sort of device. He said, no monarch, no nobility, no nobility, no monarch, right? And after the Haitian Revolution, when Charles X wants to recoup the fortunes of the French nobility, what does he do? He drags these sort of dead-enders out, lost their property inside the Lang, and tries to rehabilitate their fortunes through this indemnity. And so there's a way in which this whole plantation complex and these elites, it had a second life precisely because it was attached to a certain form of elite power. So there's always a collaboration going on. As to limitless accumulation, I'll leave it to Kit.
So well, about limitless accumulation, what I was able to find, one of the things that fascinated me most in the documents I found is actually testimony of the impact of those Americans who returned home. And this is actually the beauty of microhistory. You need just one or two testimonies to tell you everything. But it says, and this is a story about a woman who wanted to get married but had no papers, and so they actually interviewed people in the early 19th century in the countryside, and they said, oh yeah, but 20 years ago, the father of this young woman actually came from America, and an entire crowd came out to look at him, and this was so incredible, and there were so many onlookers, and so it tells you, so you can imagine, so this guy came probably in a carriage with a half dozen black slaves, and and in the middle of nowhere in the vast countryside. So that's what you have to imagine, how impactful this was on people's imagination. Hence the image of the oncle d'Amérique. At the same time, of course, there is testimony, especially in the 1820s, when the play by Eugène Séric, L'Oncle d'Amérique, was performed in Paris, great skepticism as to the reality of those fortunes, which of course most of them had entirely collapsed by then. But about the sort of limitless accumulation of wealth, I think what both of our books are showing is that the reason why, and this was analyzed by particularly Jean-Baptiste Say in the early 19th century, so the reason why so much wealth was accumulated is really twofold. First, of course, it was the exploitation of slave labor. The other reason was monopoly. And so say in those said that this accumulation of wealth, particularly in the hands of merchants, because they were the ones who made the most of the money, gave this illusion of prosperity that struck people's imagination so much, and explains, as Paul shows in his book, why somehow the government and the elites wanted to perpetuate this system decades after it had shown that it was simply unworkable.
You have a question up front.
I want to know if you have any highlights regarding the hereditary systems. How has it been cut and pasted from the métropole to the département d'outre-mer, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Guyane française, as well as independent country as Haiti? This is not just a case of France. This could have been also an interaction approach when we speak about the Dutch in Sint Maarten, Curaçao, and the Netherlands Antilles. So, is there any impact from the metropole hereditary system implanted in the Antilles that the book speaks about in the post-Bonapartism and post-colonialism eras?
I'm sorry, I didn't really catch the beginning of your question. I'm not sure.
You spoke at the end of the conversation about heirs, who receives legacies from the family.
Oh, yeah.
How has it been modified throughout history and geographically between the metropole and the DOMs, and as well as between the post-Bonapartism, post-colonialism and contemporary era? Thanks.
I'm not sure.
I'll take that.
Oh.
I can tell you in the case of my book about inheritance law. Part of the story is that originally my characters lived under the old regime law, particularly the laws of Lower Navarre, which was one of the Basque provinces, and there was this very strong system of primogeniture. Actually, if you want to be pedantic as an anthropologist, you could say it's absolute cognatic primogeniture. So that is so it's the firstborn child, male or female, who gets everything. So that was the rule, and it impacted a lot what was going on in decisions to emigrate and in decisions to share or not share profits and so on. So I do talk about that a lot. So, but then the French Revolution happens, and then there's the civil law code, and then the legal picture changes entirely because the civil code is egalitarian. So all the children get equal shares. All the children, male or female, get equal shares. And so that changes the picture dramatically.
We have a question down front here on the microphone.
Thank you. This was really fascinating. I'm excited to read both books. I wanted to ask you about the French specificity of the project, because in some ways it's about global capital, but these families are from France. And I thought at first that you were going to make an argument, sort of a structural argument about capitalism, global capitalism, and with the 2008 crisis and sort of linking global capitalism to military war, colonialism. But then, when you were highlighting the role of mercantilism, I wasn't sure again if you were actually putting your finger on a kind of French way of doing globalization, and whether you're also reacting to this idea that France was a kind of laggard, later
Right.
in some ways, whether you're revising that history.
I could answer very simply. So in the Caribbean in the 18th century, the main rivalry was between the English and the French. I mean, the Spanish were there too, but the system was very similar. So it was mercantilism, and so you have an exclusive trade zone that you protect by military means. So the British were doing it, the French were doing it, the Spanish. So it was the exact same system. So there was nothing particularly unusual about the French situation. except that the British were stronger because they had a stronger navy, and when the war happened, usually the French lost. So but that's why the characters in our stories had such complicated lives, and why they went through so many disasters. And in a sense, Emma Rothschild's book, there's a lot happening, but in a sense, the characters in her book had somewhat less complicated lives because they lived within the relatively safe confines of the British Empire. Our characters had really complicated lives because when there was a war, usually the French lost.
I think that there are systemic differences. There were systemic differences between the French colonial empire in the 18th century and the British. And as Pierre points out, when the two went to war, usually the British won. There are other differences, and I don't think I want to go into them too much, except to say that generally they tend to redound to the advantage of the British, the kind of superior integration of internal markets in France and things like this. This all made the French empire much kind of weaker and subject to this equilibrium. But a kind of wider point that I'm searching for in my book to establish is that all these people on these islands, whether they're British, they're Dutch, they're Spanish, or they're French, they are kind of trapped within this system. There's a kind of epistemic problem. They're working their own, few acres of land, and they have their slaves, and they have no real, and I said this before, they have no incentive to see beyond. They really cannot see beyond. So they're all kind of running in the same track. And I'm aware that, in the British Empire in particular, you have abolitionist movements. But I don't think that has anything kind of generically to do with what's going on in this plantation system. So I definitely would sort of emphasize that many of these actors are subject to the same disconnect that prevents them from thinking beyond.
Go ahead, please. The mic, so.
Yeah, go for it.
So thank you very much. Like Camille, I really look forward to reading the books. I had a question about the scale, the question of scale that Emmanuel brought up. Because in the original microhistory program, you adjusted the scale to see things differently, right? It was like the jeu d'échelle. And so the object was the same object you'd always been working on, but you simply adjusted the scale to shed light in a new way on that object. Here, it seems as if the questions of scale has become an object in its own right? That you have the micro, the individual, the family within a global world system. And so I'm wondering what are the stakes and what is the point of microhistory in this new kind of global microhistory? It's not just a question of an optic, it's a new topic almost, I want to say, sort of connected histories in micro scale.
I was trained as an historian of France, there's a whole kind of really, really rich literature on the regions of France. And what one sees in this sort of relationship between the regional and the national is that the regional always must implicitly, if only implicitly, reflect the national. And that's the sort of jeu d'échelle that we're talking about here. I think what I find kind of liberating about it, if indeed it's this sort of new global microhistory, is that it says, well, you can actually cut up the world in slightly different ways. Saint-Domingue doesn't have to stand for every French island. It can be just another part of this region, the Antilles and so on. You can have comparative insights from one part to another, or you can compare regions within the French Empire. So I actually think that global microhistory, it's not just, I think it is a different sort of optic, but it makes possible, I know this is going to sound kind of empty, and I'm sorry about that, but it makes possible a different sort of localism. It doesn't necessarily always have reference to the kind of national or given national imperial scale, and that's what I find kind of useful.
So I'll just say something sort of very concrete about the way I work. So again, it was entirely document-driven because originally I didn't know all that much about 18th century Caribbean history, I was really interested in finding out who these people were and where they went and what happened to them and how they made those decisions. So so my goal initially was to reconstruct the individual trajectories always within the family context. And as I was looking at documents, often I just did not understand the document because it was alluding to some event I did not know about. It was alluding to a law I did not understand. So the fact that it was document-driven really forced me to probably ask questions that someone who was coming with other expectations might not have asked, and I was also following these people across the globe because they were really going places. So at some point they're in Saint-Domingue. One of my characters actually traveled a lot. He was in Cartagena de Indias, and then he was in Trinidad, and then he was in New Orleans, and then in Cuba. And then, all that, I had to learn about those places as they, so the perspective was always, so I was always starting from an individual experience and then expanding to sort of the immediate vicinity and then broader and broader consideration. So indeed always going from the individual and the local to the much bigger picture all the time, but that was almost by way of necessity and by the fact that it was entirely document-driven.
I'd like to follow up there if I could. We're approaching the end of our time, but I did want to ask quickly about, so you both told your story about writing these books about the sort of family art, family papers. Actually, Carl made that point for you about the sort of family letters and conversation that you had. And I guess I'd like to hear from the two of you how much is out there, do you think? It's a purely speculative question. I mean, but I say it from somebody who's worked on the British Empire and slavery in the British Empire, where a lot of the family papers that pertain to slavery, there's always more to find, but people have been looking for these for several decades now, and I think it's increasingly unlikely that giant caches of plantation papers are going to emerge. My sense, although correct me if I'm wrong, that this has not been, the sort of looking for these kinds of materials has not been as common for those who study the old regime. And I guess it would be interesting to hear your thoughts about whether they're exceptional, of course, because each individual case is exceptional, but whether this is a genre of material that researchers could expect to find, especially outside of the National Archives and regional centers spread around the country.
I think there is more to be found. But in the case of French colonial history, there is the work of Gabriel Leblanc,
Yep.
which Paul does discuss in the introduction to his book, and that's what he did. He was a very interesting figure because he worked, as Paul says, he worked on the margins of French academia, and he was incredibly active and energetic. But his thing was what he called papier de famille, or family papers, and so he had these personal connections with dozens of people who actually gave them their family papers, and he worked with that. So he started with the Poitou, and then he expanded. But I think there is more to be found, particularly in regional or actually departmental, but also in private hands. I mean, that was my own experience. You know, in this village, I actually, so I knew, so there was one person, so he was actually the son of a local expert, I mean, a man who on environment started working on local history, who actually collected documents, and there in the closet in that house, I found the entire list of purchases made to equip this young man who was going to the colonies. So it was there in the closet.
I think there's more to be found. But I think, and it's not to evade your question, I don't know how much
Sure.
is there. And I don't know, I mean, everyone has their own personal style of prying these documents of more or less willing hands, you know. One thing that's worth thinking about, you know, to compare the British to the French case is just, let's say, epistolary and documentary practices. And I think that there's a lot to be said about the differences between the French and the British case. There just seems to be more for the British case, even though there's a real insistence, at least in the letters I've been able to look at, about the importance of being a careful letter writer and setting these things forth elusively and hopefully, being able to retain them. So I'm not sure if this has to do with different merchant cultures or this has to do with different educational practices, but I think that there's something to be said about that.
It may also have to do something about survival patterns as well.
Sure, there's this
That was
horrible
preserved.
few lines in one of these letters where this Cormier's manager, and he says, and I'm sorry that this cassette of letters slipped out of my hands and it went into the stream, you know. Just imagine. Yes, you feel my pain, I see.
All right, we're beyond our time. Please thank the panel. Wonderful.